This episode of Ask the Doctors is being brought to you by Wayne County Government. This episode of
I'm willing to take the shot.
I'm willing to take the shot.
I'm willing to take the shot.
I'm Dr. Bandari, physician at Reed Health. I'm willing to take the shot.
I am willing to roll up my sleeves and take the shot. Are you willing to take the shot?
We are willing to take the shot.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Ask the Doctors on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11, WCTV Channel 21, and streaming on Facebook Live. I'm Eric Marsh, Executive Director of Whitewater Community Television. Honored once again to be sitting between our illustrious doctors who are here giving us another week of their time, dug out just to be here.
That's right. Wild dogs couldn't keep me away from this studio, Eric.
Never mind, I won't even travel that road. David Jetmore, Wayne County Health Officer, Dr. Thomas Huth, Vice President, Medical Affairs, Reed Health. Gentlemen, once again, seriously, thank you for your time. We really do appreciate it.
Dr. Jetmore at least could ski over. He's like skis. I don't ski, so.
Is that cross country or it's not like downhill here, right?
No, it's pretty much level ground here in the Midwest. It's helpful to have a mountain.
Sorry, I got nothing for you there. But since you were gone and came back, things continue to at least sound like they are getting better. Why don't you kind of catch us up on what your week has been like?
Well, things are getting better. Nationally, infections are down 40-some%. Deaths have declined 35%. And I think those numbers are reflected here in Wayne County. Our positivity rate has gotten down to less than 5%. We're now in going by the color codes that the state assigns counties. We're in yellow. And if we continue to improve, we may drop down into blue. So things are getting better. We continue to vaccinate. We did have a problem with our vaccination related to this storm. I don't know if I told you this, Tom, but our vaccine is sitting in Louisville and it can't get here because of the weather. So we were able to contact the health department in Rushville, and they're giving us, rather than having to cancel all these appointments we made, we're borrowing 300 doses from Rushville, and then when we get our dose, which is finally supposed to get here on Monday, then we can pay Rushville back and continue on. So we're still giving 600 doses a week, about 120 doses a day. So the vaccinations continue, the deaths and infections, and I'm sure hospital rates are all on the decline, so that's a good thing.
Doctors, nurses, able to take a little bit more of a breath? I know you've talked over the last couple of weeks that what we're seeing in the community was not completely reflected at Reed. How are things progressing there?
They are improving, but when we get to the numbers, we'll see that they're not declining to the same extent that the new infection rate is, and I think that has to do with the things that happen towards the end of a wave, the more severe consequences. We're still seeing some of that. But to your point, it is a whole lot more manageable from the hospital's perspective. We still have a high rate of cases, a high number of cases in the hospital with known or suspected COVID-19. But the severity is lower, and people are able to take time off and take some vacation time, and I know that a lot of people are looking forward to taking time with when spring break time rolls around, with if you have kids in school and such. And so we're hoping that the numbers will stay down through that period. We'll just have to see what happens.
How do you all continue to have the conversation with people coming into both of your facilities about what their responsibility continues to be, even now that they're vaccinated, particularly those people that have had that second shot? We've already heard that there's a couple of states that have lifted their statewide mask mandates, but the guidance continues to be, I think, even after you've got your second shot, continue to mask for a period of time. What are you telling those folks, and are you getting those questions?
Well, for our part, we're telling them to continue to mask and to social distance. You know, the clinical trials for these various vaccines never gave us the information about, basically that the information we got from those clinical trials is these vaccines would prevent symptoms of COVID-19. And that's all. It didn't tell us if someone was able to spread COVID, even though they were vaccinated. They wouldn't get it, but they could carry the virus. I think that seems unlikely, and I think ultimately, if we get herd immunity, which that number seems to go up every time I hear Dr. Fauci talk, but 70 to 80%, then we can do away with masks. But for now, I'm telling people who get vaccinated that they should continue to wear a mask and social distance, and I do myself. One of the problems, too, just socially, is people don't know you've been vaccinated. So if you're in a grocery store and you don't have a mask on, people feel uneasy, or anytime you're in any kind of public space. So what are your thoughts, Tom?
I mean, virtually the same. On that question, I always refer to the Indiana Department of Health, which, you know, they need to set the standard for Indiana. They have not indicated any tendency to look at reducing mask mandates and such. The governor's plans all hinge on the IDOH plans, all in terms of restrictions of things like crowd sizes and such, all hinge on the color of your county. And I think we won't hear much talk about lifting mask mandates and social distancing and getting back to quote-unquote normal until we have a lot, or virtually all the counties in blue or less. What is there something below blue? I kind of forget how the color scheme works.
Blue, unless it's a blank slate.
Yeah. So, you know, once there are still a lot of counties in red, still a lot of counties with elevated levels, and I think until it really looks like they're sustainably in lower levels, we're not going to hear talk about changing those kinds of things from the state, is my prediction.
You know, one of the benefits of being vaccinated is, obviously the main benefit is you're not going to get COVID. But another benefit is the CDC has said that if you are around somebody that has COVID for more than 15 minutes closer than 6 feet, you do not have to quarantine for 2 weeks like you normally would. And this is assuming you're not sick, and it's been at least 2 weeks since your second vaccination. So that's a good thing.
How will we know when one of the variants hits our area?
Well, that's sequencing of a genome, which is not done here in Indiana. I think it's done at the CDC labs. Tom may have more information on this than I do, but the reason, England's done a lot more study on variants of the virus than the United States has, and that UK variant, I think, was found early because of that. And I think every state may look for variants at a different rate than other states, but we're going to find out about this by chance. We're going to do somewhere somebody's going to do routine genomic sequence studies on a virus specimen and determine that it's a new variant.
Yeah, I think we're not going to know until, they have a reason to do specific genetic testing or genetic sequencing, which is, as Dr. Jetmer mentioned, is not commonly done. We don't routinely do that. We don't have the ability to do that locally. I'm not even sure. There might be some research labs in the state that can, but this is not a common thing to do. I'm pretty sure the state they take random samples from, the sentinel labs around the state, and we'll send those for genomic sequencing to try to detect whether variants are here. But I think they already know that the UK variant is present in, probably fairly widespread in the state already. I think they've identified, more than 100, I think, of those from specimen testing that they've done a few weeks ago or a month ago. So that doesn't mean there were only 100 cases. It's just they're doing random sampling, and then they can make some estimates about what proportion of the cases may be due to a particular lineage of virus. But at the end of the day, what matters is, are we having lots of spread? Are we seeing worse severity? Are we, in which case they might do more intense testing to kind of see, is this what the issue is or not? We don't really even know whether the variants, the ones that are currently known and out there, whether they truly have significant impact on disease severity, transmission, and susceptibility to the vaccine and so forth.
The one alarming thing is that that variant in South Africa, which appears to be somewhat resistant to the AstraZeneca vaccine. It prevents severe disease, but it does not prevent mild or moderate symptoms. So it still has some value, but not the value that we're getting currently from Pfizer, Moderna. And I think that's the fear of a lot of epidemiologists, that this vaccine, or this virus, which is going to continue to mutate, will be able to game the system and come up with a version of itself that is unaffected by the vaccine or less affected by the vaccine. So the more people we can get vaccinated quickly, the less likely that becomes, because all of these mutations occur within people. They don't occur with the virus floating in the air. So that lends a sense of urgency to the pace at which we're vaccinating people.
Bring another person into this conversation. You're watching Ask the Doctors on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11, WCTV Channel 21, streaming on Facebook Live. We are taking your questions. You can put those on our Facebook page, or you can send them via Twitter to @WCTVinfo. A few weeks ago, I had a chance to speak with Dr. Peter Blair, a biology professor at Earlham College, teaches courses in genetics, molecular biology, immunology, and infectious diseases. Asked him if he would join us today, and he has taken some time. I don't know. Did you dump some students out in the snow and not make them do class today in order to join us?
It's great to be with you again, Eric, and then to join the doctors is an honor to listen to the show so far. And quite the contrary, actually. I'm giving an exam right now, so I'm hiding away in an undisclosed location so my students don't find me.
Okay, good. And you're a professor at Earlham College, and one of the things that you mentioned when you were here with me is that Earlham has done very well as far as keeping the infection rate down. I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about how that's happened, particularly with the fact that you all have students there on campus, living in dorms, having to eat together, things of that nature. What's your secret to your success?
Well, first, I got to knock on wood. Sometimes I tell a story of, or at least a quote from one of my favorite microbiologists, Louis Pasteur, who said, "Chance favors the prepared mind." And I think going into this, Earlham's made some really wise decisions, even before they know they might work, on how to keep the virus at bay and from entering our campus community. For example, I think we looked at our kind of semester schedule. And so we can actually start it earlier in August so that the 14-week semester would be done by Thanksgiving. So our students who come from across the country, almost all 50 states represented, and dozens of foreign countries, could then travel and not be coming back and forth on our campus with like an open border, bringing a virus in and out. And so within that, we also divided into 2 7-week kind of terms where students only take 2 courses at a time. And that allows for less traffic in classroom spaces and less contact from peer-to-peer and from peer to faculty members. So we tried to kind of decrease the essential contacts. And that seemed to work well. And we also have some mandatory testing, at the onset of the semesters. And that we did find some positive cases early in the fall, and covering that same position now as we started our spring semester. But then our internal contract tracing team takes place and isolates and quarantines the folks. And that's been working well. And I think we also are doing a daily assessment. So each of us has an app that both students and staff kind of check in with a self-assessment. And if we have symptoms, we don't come in, or students stay in the dorm room. So I think that's all kind of keys to success. I think one thing that's really great to see is that our students are very responsible about their mitigation efforts. They take pride in their mask wearing, they care for each other. I often see them wiping down classrooms, volunteering their time to do so to keep the community safe. And this is all hopes for that if Earlham can maintain its safety, that eventually we can actually get our students and staff back in the community because of that volunteering and kind of our externship programs, which several of them are with Reed, such as our community medicine program and our health externship volunteering with Reed Job Shadow and Reed Volunteering to help get our students back in the community. We're not there yet, but I think that's where our goal is.
As you're teaching your classes and talking to your students, one of the things we're hearing a great deal is the fact that there are a number of people, Dr. Huth has mentioned in the medical field, we're hearing that a number of our soldiers all seem to have some misconceptions about the safety of the vaccine, whether they should take it. What are you hearing from some of your students? I assume that being a biology professor, this is a question that has come up a fair amount. What are you telling them about some of those misconceptions, and are you hearing some hesitancy on their part about getting it, even though it's still months away for many of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think, slight hesitancy, but I think for the most part, Earlham students are looking forward for their turn in line to get their jab and to start that vaccination. And actually, fresh off the press today, our president, Ann Heltman, announced on our weekly kind of video that in agreement with the Indiana Department of Health, students and employees of Earlham College are scheduled to be vaccinated on campus at the end of March, early April. And so that created the hallway a lot of excitement. And so I didn't hear much hesitancy. I heard more of, ooh, we can't wait for that, because again, we can increase our chance for kind of our internal herd immunity on campus that will eventually lead to expansion outwards into the community.
Dr. Huth?
Dr. Blair, it's great to talk to you and great to hear about the good things that are happening at Earlham. You all are doing a fantastic job. A lot of universities struggled, particularly earlier on in the year, with large numbers of cases in places like Ohio State and so forth. And I think at that time, a lot of the discussion was around, you could get the students to kind of comply with distancing and masking and hand hygiene and so forth on campus, but then kids are at college in order to have the whole experience, which is the social experience, and so when they're outside the classroom or off campus, then tend to throw the cautions to the wind. But we haven't heard much about that lately. Was there some of that early on in your experience at Earlham, or did you think you had really much better engagement from the very start?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Huth, for the question. Yes, it's always great to be a part of a community that's predominantly 18 to 21-year-olds, and that there's a social aspect of college that's important, and them being able to participate socially, and we've been able to open our athletics a little bit more this semester when they were shut down last semester, and that's also important for our community. And we made it a long way last semester until like the last week of classes, when I think some students may have let down their guards a little bit with kind of some more social interactions on campus, and our numbers went up just toward the end. But that was actually our staff and residents life was able to lower that pretty well. But it's a balance. It's that balance of kind of students want to be good citizens among the group, with also maintaining some kind of social groupings together. But luckily, most of our students are on campus and residential, and so I think that's advantageous. It's Earlham's size and scale. We have 1,000 students, and we can that's a different scale than Ohio State, which may have commuters and things. So kind of that small but mighty atmosphere at Earlham, I think, allows for us to get a little bit more communication and kind of the on board. It's an analogy I say is how good Israel's doing right now with its vaccination rates. A small country has about 80% of their population now, at least with one dose of the Pfizer vaccine, and it's kind of a nice case study to follow along the way. I kind of like to think of small liberal arts schools that are residential, maybe we can be that kind of analogy on the higher education point of view.
Yeah, and so another thing that I think I remember particularly early on when schools were starting to resume was a lot of concern and fears on the part of staff and teachers about potential exposure that might be driven by asymptomatic students and so forth. Was there some of that kind of concern amongst the teachers and staff at Earlham, and is that still an issue now?
Sure. I think it's always on our minds, but our data is suggesting kind of good things, kind of like we're seeing in Richmond High School and the local schools, is there's not much in-classroom transmission going on. And I think that pattern is being followed at Earlham. Also, more recently, again, with our sports teams starting up again, there hasn't been practice-based transmission back and forth, and there hasn't been even game transfer when our teams play, home and away games. So that's all good, I think. And I think we've been able to also see that, early on, I think there's a lot of wiping down of surfaces and a lot of alcohol and things spraying on surfaces, and we realized that may not have to do that as often as we thought. So that's been reduced kind of as well. But I think the common mitigation of hand washing, every student who's wearing masks and faculty, I'm just in my office now, so I feel safe without my mask on. But those standard practices of keeping the distance, and in the classroom, the chairs are all 6 feet apart, right? There's often little X's on the floor where the chairs can be. So even when you're having in-person instruction, which I think we think is the best kind of pedagogical and learning environment, we're able to do that in the classrooms that we have. Less students in the classroom, less students in the laboratories as well.
I would, if I were a university professor in a biological science, I would say, teaching classes of students in the middle of a pandemic would be a tremendous teaching opportunity to kind of borrow some of the themes in the science from what's happening around people every day, and we'd get maybe much better engagement at learning. Is that what some of you and other teachers there in the sciences are doing, leveraging some of the concepts and lessons from this pandemic to aid in the classroom teaching?
Yeah, absolutely. I call this kind of just-in-time teaching. When you have a kind of a global moment like this that you kind of latch on to and really enhance the student experience and maybe even relieve some anxiety as part of the teaching of this next generation of student learners. My colleague who teaches epidemiology right now, Lindsay McGee, when she heard about the vaccines coming to Earlham's campus, hopefully in March, April, jumped for joy and said maybe we can start a kind of an internal public health campaign to inform employees and students about the benefits and the safety. A lot of the things that this show with Dr. Jetmore and yourself have talked about over the weeks to get that confidence and to reduce that hesitancy in our campus environment. Last fall, I was teaching my immunology course, and what a moment that was. Every day we'd come in and talk about the cytokine storms and the way the B cells and T cells gain memory in that response and follow the literature as it's coming up in real time. I know that you and Dr. Jetmore are up on the current literature that comes out, but every day new studies come out, and it's just really ripe for students and faculty to engage on that together.
Yeah, you mentioned the literature and the research, and I thought I wanted to ask you a question, but if the answer is you haven't studied it, that's fine, but I wonder if you have an opinion on something that I've been following, which is I feel like I can sense in the literature and in the recommendations that come from the CDC and others that there's a lengthening out of the, or a setting the stage for a lengthening out of the interval between the 2 shots of the current mRNA virus vaccines. As you may know, the CDC and the FDA both say that it can be given up to 6 weeks in between That changed about 3 or 4 weeks ago in their guidance, whereas prior we had been very insistent on it's got to be 28 days or 21 days, depending on which product. But now these things have been lengthened, and I noticed that there were some articles a few weeks ago in the New England Journal of Medicine, kind of looking at the how much neutralizing antibody titers are present, how soon after each vaccination, and the original article basically said that after, I think they used the Pfizer, I think it was in the case of Pfizer, that after the first dose that they were detecting antibody levels and the 50 protective levels achieved in about 50% of people after the first dose. But then there was a letter this week in New England Journal of Medicine that re-examined their data and said actually they made a mistake in their calculations. It's 90%, 92%. Whereas after 2 doses, we were kind of expecting 94, 95%. I say all that to set the stage that I think this is just another step along the idea that maybe we should be giving just, like they do in England, 3 months apart so that we can get first doses to more people. And I wonder if you've looked at any of that kind of information.
Yeah, I think probably just as you have, trying to stay on top of the literature and as things come up so fast. Yes, I still think I'm in the camp, and of course I always say I'm not a medical doctor. I say listening to you and Dr. Jetmore are more wise, but my reading of the literature is that second dose is still important, but may not have to be so precise with that 21-day with the Pfizer and the 28-day with the Moderna vaccine that has been prescribed. I think that was certainly the foundation, because that was what the 30,000 and the 40,000 clinical trials individuals got, and so the data was based on that. But I think I would still recommend that whether it's that 3rd or 4th or 5th week, it's important to get that and pursue that second dose. So I think the other studies that came out this week were saying with 1 dose you get that kind of 90% effectiveness. But with that, I think my hesitancy would be they still don't know how long the memory would be after, or it's granted by the booster shot after that second one. And so I always think about what's the maximum chance of getting the most of our population immune at a certain time. And I think the second dose provides that perhaps a longer duration of immunological memory for B cells and T cells to persist and be ready to attack and fight soon after that next exposure or that first exposure. So I still am a fan of the 2 doses for both of those, the Pfizer and Moderna. But I think the intervals, if you have to wait a week or 2, maybe that's good. And I think getting the vaccine to more and more people with a first dose will help support that cause for herd immunity that we're all kind of shooting for.
Dr. Blair, I know you've got students taking an exam, and I know you want to get back to them, but real quickly, I just want to check with you. I think near the end of this week, we'll start to hear a little bit more about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine coming out. You were able to talk to me in the In Focus program about what was in the vaccines that we have out. Can you talk a little bit real quickly about what you have found in your reading of the difference between the Pfizer and Moderna and the Johnson & Johnson vaccines? Is there much difference in their makeup?
Yeah, great question. And so we talked at length last time, I think, about the mRNA platform for vaccine design for both the Moderna and the Pfizer. And the Johnson & Johnson is different. And one difference is related to our last conversation. It's actually a single-dose vaccine. So you do only have to get 1 jab for it. And the vaccine platform it's on is different as well. It's actually based on a modified chimpanzee virus called an adenovirus that's been inactivated, so it cannot replicate in your body. So there's the safety disclaimer. But once it gets into your cells, it does make its way to the nucleus, where the gene of interest, which is, again, the code for the spike protein. So that should sound familiar to us all, because the actual active ingredient is the same target, that spike protein that extends from the virus particles. And then it uses the host machinery in the cell within the nucleus to transcribe that DNA into a transient form of called RNA, and then the RNA goes into the cytoplasm of the cell outside the nucleus, where it can be turned into that viral spike protein again. And at that point, the vaccines are kind of converging, right? The Moderna and the Pfizer have the RNA that's in the cytoplasm to be converted into the spike protein to induce immunity, because that would be seen as foreign to the immune system. And at that point, the spike protein has been made, but it's just the starting point in kind of in the information flow of a cell. And so it's a DNA-based vaccine as opposed to an RNA.
I'm sure your students are probably hunting you down, looking for answers or something. I'm not sure. I haven't taken a test in a class in quite a while. I want to thank you for spending some time with us, letting me call back on you again. Hopefully we'll talk to you again before the school year ends.
Eric, thanks so much for letting me be part of the show. It's my pleasure, and my best to the doctors, too. I appreciate what they do each week to inform the community. So thank you all.
Thank you. Dr. Peter Blair, biology professor at Earlham College. Appreciate the time that he gave us. You're watching Ask the Doctors on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11, WCTV Channel 21, streaming on Facebook Live. We should probably get to some of your questions. So if the folks in the booth would bring up the first one, we'll start a string here. What's the reason for Reed Health shutting down the vaccine clinics in Randolph County and Fayette County?
Well, there were multiple things going on there. One was those were small, very small venues, only capable of very small throughput, and we only intended those to be temporary while we then switched to concentrating our resources on operating the Kuhlman Center, which is a much larger venue, capable of much larger throughput, and we think it actually serves the region better. For those who can travel, and we're working with the local health departments in those counties to see how we can support them in getting more vaccine to people who can't travel. But basically, it's a matter of efficiency and managing our resources well. We just weren't going to get enough vaccine to be able to operate all the sites was another factor, just besides the bare efficiency aspect. But it's been clear that we're not going to be able to continue those because we could not get the vaccine to operate all 3 sites to their maximum capacity. And so, there's a confluence of factors there. The last few weeks we were limited to only finishing up the second shots for the I think we were doing the Moderna virus in those locations, and we're not getting any more Moderna vaccine. So a lot of things were happening there. It just kind of became necessary.
Next question. If you have never had COVID but have been fully vaccinated, should you expect a positive or negative antibody test if randomly tested?
Well, hopefully you'll have a positive test. I mean, the whole reason to get the COVID vaccine is for your immune system to generate antibodies. So I would expect your antibody test to be positive if you've been vaccinated.
Yeah, you should expect it to become positive. That's what we want to see. But I guess maybe there's a little bit of devil's in the details kind of aspect to it, which is that it depends kind of which antibody test we're doing. Because sometimes the more general, some antibody tests may detect antibodies that are present that aren't necessarily neutralizing antibodies, but they may be the wide variety of antibodies that are present after a natural infection. Yeah, but what we're looking for really is the neutralizing antibody. You're going to have basically exclusively that after vaccination. So I think it depends exactly what the antibody test is, and you kind of want to ask the question, will this detect neutralizing antibody? And then the other thing is that some tests, whether or not you have a positive or negative depends on what the cutoff level is set at. So if you have a quote-unquote negative test, that doesn't mean you don't have antibody. It just may be at a level that's below the cutoff that they identify for positive or negativity. And I mention that specifically because they do a version of antibody testing at the blood center. If you go to donate whole blood, they're testing every donation for neutralizing antibody now. because they're trying to identify people who might be able to become convalescent plasma donors. But they have the cutoff level set at a high, because they need to get high titer donors. There needs to be an amount of antibody that's in circulating a system that's above a certain point. So that's where they have the cutoff set. So if you go to donate blood and they tell you that your antibody test was negative, that may only mean it was below the high titer level. Doesn't mean you don't have antibodies. So you have to kind of understand what you're looking at and ask the right questions about what the meaning is behind any particular result, because you typically will not get a number. You'll just get a positive or a negative.
Next question. If someone has a fever, etc., from the first or second vaccine shot, when can they take pain reliever, if at all, and how much? Can that interfere with the effectiveness of the vaccine? Would you advise against it unless viewed as absolutely necessary? There's a lot of parts to that, so I'm going to ask Steve to kind of keep that one on the screen for a minute as the doctors kind of go through that.
I'll go first and Dave can jump in so that he can correct anything I'm saying wrong. I need that sometimes. So there is a lot of discussion about the use of pain relievers, and particularly the anti-inflammatory pain relievers. That's things like aspirin, ibuprofen. It might be a slightly different conversation when we talk about Tylenol or acetaminophen, because that's not an anti-inflammatory, but it can suppress some of the side effects and symptoms that you can have. There's a theoretic concern that taking pain relievers, particularly the anti-inflammatory types, maybe can interfere with immune reaction to the vaccine, and that's based solely on there is some data in children with other vaccines that they may not get as high antibody levels if they've been using things like aspirin or ibuprofen, Advil and such when they had vaccinations. But notice I said antibody levels. That doesn't mean that they're not immune. There is no established link to to suppressing an immune response to the point where you don't have immunity in response to taking those vaccines. Now transport that to today's conversation about the COVID-19 vaccine. To my knowledge, there is no scientific data out there to establish one way or the other whether taking Tylenol or Advil or whatever makes any difference. And if you read the CDC or FDA's guidance on that, it kind of has it both ways. It'll say maybe because there's this theoretic concern, you should try to avoid it. But you know what? If you have side effects and symptoms, don't worry about it. Just take the Tylenol. So my advice to people is to keep it simple. It's probably not a big deal, and don't worry about it. Don't necessarily pre-treat yourself. If you have symptoms and side effects, then take the Tylenol and such in order to sleep or feel a little better. I don't think it's that big a deal.
Yeah, I have to echo those thoughts. I think it's more of a theoretical concern because what we've seen with children vaccines, and if you've got a raging headache or a low-grade fever, I'd take some Tylenol and go on.
Okay. Next question. If you had the vaccine one day and the next day had unplanned surgery, would that negate the shot from working?
No. It shouldn't have any. The surgery, now, I guess I can look at the huge expanse of what kind of surgery you're having, but, if you're having open heart surgery and your blood was being replaced, it might be a factor. But for most surgeries, it's not going to really have an effect on the functioning of your immune system, the vast majority of surgeries. So I would say the short answer is no. Tom can probably elaborate on that.
Agreed.
That's quite an elaboration
I was
for
gonna
you,
say.
my friend.
Wow. I used to get F's on my test for coming up with answers like that. Next question. I've heard that there have been a few cases of Bell's palsy after someone has had the COVID vaccine. If someone has had Bell's palsy in the past, do you believe that they have a higher chance of getting it again?
We've not heard very much about Bell's palsy lately. Kind of in the beginning when we were first rolling out the vaccines, there were a few cases reported, and so there was this theoretic concern. But I think what we're going to find is that the number of cases is really not significantly related to the vaccine because, when you think about it, when you're giving millions of doses, I mean, in the U.S., we're over 50-some million doses given. Worldwide, more than 150 million doses given, I think. It just stands to reason that some people who get a shot are, in a period of time afterwards, are going to have things happen to them, and just because there seems to be a temporal relationship, as we would say, doesn't mean there's a causal relationship. You have to really look at, does this happen in the population of vaccinees more frequently than in the non-vaccinated population, and that's going to take a lot more science and study to really know. But we haven't heard much about Bell's palsy lately, so I have a feeling that it's probably not a big deal. Now, specifically to the question, if you've had Bell's palsy before, should you worry about taking the shot? And the CDC actually has explicit guidance on this, and their answer is no, don't worry about it.
Yeah, and I think you need to remember, the incidence of Bell's palsy is about 4 to 6 people per 100,000, so it's not a real common malady. But I think one of the things people need to remember is when you get Bell's palsy, which is paralysis of the facial nerve, 97% of people recover completely without any medical treatment. And I agree with Tom. I think we're, with 4 to 6 per 100,000, we're vaccinating millions of people. Obviously, a lot of those people are going to get Bell's palsy after they've been vaccinated, but they would have gotten Bell's palsy had they not been vaccinated.
Okay. We're going to get to one more question, then we're going to turn to this week's statistics. If you have a question, there is still a little bit of time. We've got about 14 minutes left in the show. You can send your question to our Facebook page, or you can send it to Twitter at WCTV Info. So next question up. I was recently in close contact with someone who is sick, but we were wearing masks and following other precautions. It's probably just a cold, but they are awaiting their COVID test result. Should I self-quarantine, or is it okay for me to be around other people?
I think it would be wise if this person self-quarantined until the other person gets a COVID test and finds out whether or not it was a cold or COVID. If it was COVID, obviously, he'll need to quarantine for 14 days.
Okay. We're hearing a lot less about the flu this year, aren't we?
We're not seeing any flu. Tom was talking the other day that there is no flu. So maybe we're going to have to be wearing masks during flu season in coming years.
He was only joking. He was only...
No, I'm just kidding.
Don't hit us up. He was only kidding. Dr. Huth, you normally at this point in time kind of take us through and update us on what some of the numbers look like inside of Reed Health. Why don't you do that for us?
Of course. I've given you a little bit different view. I've merged a couple of things. These are the Wayne County cases, and way down on the far right hand, almost microscopically, if you guys can zoom in on that, we can see that the week so far has about 40 positive cases. It's challenging to work that technology, I know, so I'll give you some grace there. Basically, the downward trend continues in Wayne County. I'm estimating for the week there'll be about 50, should be, mathematically, it's 56, maybe as many as 64 cases. That's the 95% confidence interval based on the data that I have. I included kind of within that, over on the left-hand side, a slightly different view of the death statistic, and went to a slightly more technical, but I think our audience is more intelligent than your average bear, and so they can get this concept, which is, this is basically a way of visualizing the comparison between how many deaths we should expect based on our demographic characteristics of our cases and what we've actually seen. And basically what the saying over on the left-hand side is that the ratio of our observed deaths to expected deaths is only 89%. It's the O to E ratio, 0.89. That means we've only had about 89% of the deaths that we should, by rights, have had from the cases in the county, given its demographic makeup. And so that's good. So below the 1.0 line is good, so I colored that green. And above the 1.0 line is red, meaning that would be bad. But we're not there. We really never have been, which is really a testament to a lot of things going right in this community, I think, from the standpoint of people taking action and getting the right treatments and so forth. So the second graph is the standard one from Reed. And Reed is down to, this week, around 35 active cases of persons, of the total of persons under investigation. And the red are is 22 on average each day. There are lab positive cases in the hospital. And, that's still a pretty good proportion of the total cases in the hospital. So total admissions in the hospital. And so I don't think we're really not quite down to the level that the county and the state are seeing. But to me, that's maybe what we should expect in the latter phases of a wave. You're just kind of left with the more severe cases that have maybe longer lasting problems that have to be worked through. So there we are. So really the news is all good generally. We hope the downward trend in the hospital volumes continues, but we'll just have to see.
As we're heading into this week, obviously what you hear nationally sometimes reflects what we hear. There have been problems because of weather getting vaccines to people. There is supposed to be more of it coming out. Have you all heard whether your vaccine numbers for the coming week might change, might go up, stay the same, go down? Any word so far on what that might look like?
Speaking for the Wayne County Health Department, I think we're going to be getting 600 doses a week for the foreseeable future, at least the next month or so. I think there's just, this is a common theme around the United States. Last spring we were talking about we had no tests for COVID. Now we've got plenty of tests, but we don't have enough vaccine. But I feel optimistic. I think the vaccine manufacturers will tool up to make more vaccine, and I think we'll see more vaccines coming online. So
it feels to me like the state is a little bit more comfortable about the supply line going forward, but that doesn't mean that vaccine is necessarily plentiful. We did at Reed get 5 trays of Pfizer on Monday. That was a day earlier than we would normally get. Monday was a federal and state holiday. It was President's Day, and we were not expecting to receive our normal supply then. We were expecting it a day later, but they actually sent it early because of the snowstorm, because they anticipated, at least in our case, that if they didn't send it early, we might have trouble getting it. So if we hadn't done that, we'd probably be in the situation that you all are, that vaccine stuck someplace. But 5 trays of Pfizer is about 5,500 doses. So we feel, I guess in a certain sense, we feel flush right now, but I'm not sure how long that has to last us. They've been a little vague on exactly when we'll get the next supply. I don't think it will be next week.
So you don't get your supply on a regular basis?
Well, typically we do get supplies every Monday.
Yeah, that's when we receive our Moderna vaccine every Monday.
I'm just not sure because they give us so much this time, I'm not sure if we're getting that amount again on this coming Monday. One thing we do expect to happen next week, and I'm not really talking out of school, it's been said to us on phone calls with the state, but I know that Dr. Weaver also mentioned it in the last governor's conference, that they want to expand the age eligibility down to age 60 next week, whatever that means. I don't know if that means Monday, I don't know if that means Wednesday, I don't know if that means 4 p.m. Friday, they'll say that. I have no idea, and there's also lots of ifs and buts in there, so I think it depends on. That's another reason, though, that makes me think that they're feeling a little more comfortable that going forward the supply is going to be there, because that really opens the door to a lot more eligible people in the state. That's that's only a 5-year age drop, but it really is a tremendously huge number of people in the state would be eligible at that point. So they need to be able to deliver on the supply to be able to do that. We'll see when we get to next week. If they lower the age range, I think it's a sign that they are expecting the supplies to be there.
I was watching a news program this week, and they were talking about and really trying to get the word out about monoclonal antibody, something obviously that you've been talking about for a while. Something hasn't come up in conversation for a while that if you need a minute to talk about, convalescent plasma.
Yes.
That is one that we haven't talked about, and we want to keep going back and reminding the community about some of those things that are out there.
It takes a lot more effort to donate convalescent plasma. It's a much longer donation time frame over the period. It takes several hours, but very, very important. There's more data that in hospitalized patients, the earlier we can give it, the more effective it is. So we're actually going back to a little bit more focus on using convalescent plasma. And you can learn more about that by going to the Community Blood Center's website there, givingblood.org. And then they have their phone number there, 461-3220. That's area code 937. But there's also information at Reed's website, reedhealth.org. At the top it says Safe Pathways. Click on that. Takes you to everything related to COVID, and on the left-hand side is a link to information about convalescent plasma donation. I hope everybody who's recovered from COVID-19 or who maybe is interested in getting tested for neutralizing antibody will do that and think about becoming a convalescent plasma donor, because that can really save a life.
Okay. Let's see if we can get one more question in before we're done. Can you explain again how to be put on the vaccine backup list, if that is still happening? Also, if that is still a thing, are both the county health department and Reed Health taking names?
Well, well, first of all, one of the reasons this list exists is we don't want to waste a single dose of a vaccine at our vaccination site at the old Elder Bierman site. And these doses come in 11 or 10 doses a vial, but often 4 or 5 out of a 10 vial tray may have an extra dose, may have 11 doses. So we don't want to waste those doses. In the past, we have come up with people that we personally knew. Obviously, we don't personally know them, we don't know them, who didn't meet the age criteria, but they were sickly people. Maybe they had a history of a stroke, heart attack, they were overweight, they had diabetes or hypertension, and but they didn't quite meet the age criteria. And back then, the age criteria was 80. So they may have been a sickly 78-year-old. So we would call those people in, we'd get their cell number, and they would come in. And then this is wearing to try to give all these vaccines and keep a list. So Christine had the idea, let's vaccinate all the teachers. So we had the school make a list of older teachers that could get on this backup list. Well, we got scolded by the state for doing that. They, teachers are getting vaccinated over in Ohio. They're kind of doing this by profession. We're doing it by age, which is really the correct way to do it, because, the older you get, the more likely you are to die from the disease. But I haven't talked to Christine in the past week or two while I was gone last week, but about how she's putting this list together. But I think we don't want to waste a single dose, and if we find, in now we're probably looking for people that have a lot of associated conditions, but maybe they're not quite 65. That's the cutoff point now. What are you doing with your extra doses? How do you?
Variety of things. We'll take them to the hospital and give them to nurses who haven't been vaccinated yet. We occasionally, if there's a younger person who's not on the schedule, happens to have brought in somebody and they're standing there and they're willing to take the shot, we've disposed of extra shots that way once or twice. I mean, but that's not something we can count on doing routinely. And when it comes to having a list, that's something that, like you, the state has kind of asked us not to do. And except when it's people who otherwise qualify, have eligibility, but they just happen to not be on this schedule. If they want to be on standby and come and get it when we have extra shots, that's what the state has in mind. They have also allowed that there can be situations where a doctor has a specific individual who otherwise doesn't meet the eligibility but really needs this person immunized. And I'll just use the example of somebody who is on a solid organ transplant list. They need to get, and they're younger, they need to get immunized for everything they can before they have the transplant and go on immune suppressing medication. So those are the kinds of things that they're allowing us to put on a backup list.
Okay. Gentlemen, once again, thank you for spending your time with us on a Friday. Dr. Thomas Huth, Vice President
Pleasure.
of Medical Affairs, Reed Health. Dr. David Jetmore, Wayne County Health Officer, skier, biker, person trying to stay warm like the rest of us. You can still register for shots. ourshot.in.gov will provide you with all the information that you need, and they can help you whether you're trying to get vaccinated by the Wayne County Health Department or by Reed Health. Also, keep looking for information on if you need a ride to the Coleman Center. Roseview Transit is working on being able to provide people with rides out to the Coleman Center. So there's a number there on the screen to get more information. Thanks for watching. As always, I wish you well. Have a great weekend. This episode of Ask the Doctors has been brought to you by Wayne County Government.
I'm willing to take the shot.
I'm willing to take the shot.
I'm willing to take the shot.
I'm Dr. Bhandari, physician at Reed Health. I'm willing to take the shot.
I am willing to roll up my sleeves and take the shot. Are you willing to take the shot?
We are willing to take the shot.
Shot.